All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Peter Adesman. It's July 31st, 2023. We're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield University in McMinnville. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
First question, why wine?
Why not? Basically, my parents drank wine when I was a kid. And in fact, one of the things that I remember from the youth is they'd frequently have German wine, and they had Zeller Schwarzkatz with a little cat sitting under the capsule, and as kids we would fight for the little plastic cat. They didn't drink expensive wine, and in those days it was mostly inexpensive, either German wines or Portuguese wines. It wasn't really until probably the beginning of college that I had a earth-shattering wine that really sent me on the journey.
Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about life before that. So where were you born and raised, and where did you head off to school?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. It was actually a great place to grow up in those days, and probably a great place to be right now. There's a renaissance of Brooklyn. Then left to go to Northwestern, and from there went to the University of Illinois for medical school. And what brought me out to Oregon was going to do my internship, residency, and fellowship at Oregon Health Science University.
So tell me about your college experience and about the wine part of it specifically.
Well, I think everybody grows some wine experience in college, but it usually consists of things like Yago Sangria and Spinata and things that you really wouldn't consume right now. But actually, by senior year of medical school, I started buying wine and international wines at a liquor store in Chicago. Evanston, where Northwestern was a dry town for most of the time that I was there. That was home of the Women's Christian Temperance League. And so there wasn't, until my senior year, any alcohol in Northwestern. But I went to Chicago. There was a place called Gold Standard that became Binny's. And this guy, Matt, really introduced me to foreign wines. I remember buying my first bottle of Merceau on sale and trying that and going, wow, that's really good. A far cry from Spinata. Okay. And from there, it just expanded. I did probably start on my first wine trip was to Napa back in the 70s, and that was a wonderful experience. I can still remember seeing Charlie Wagner in overalls sitting on the porch of Camus, and when Napa was in its, I wouldn't say infancy, but still young in its history. Great wines, not a lot of money. The wine industry there was just a wonderful thing for me to experience in those days.
Well, let's talk about the other part of life there. You mentioned medical school. So tell me about your kind of education path and then career path from there.
Well, I went to medical school at University of Illinois, but during that time I didn't have a lot of time to drink and buy wine. I was pretty busy between studying the first 2 years and then doing the rotations the second 2 years. But from there I went to the University of Oregon for OHSU for my training. And that really cemented my wine knowledge. At those days, back in 1979, there were relatively few wineries, and some of them just couldn't make it. I remember going out of business sale for a winery called Reuter's Hill. It just died. And a lot of the small wineries just couldn't make it. But the pioneers did well. One of the pioneers, I know Bill Fuller from Tualatin, decided to pack it in, but all the others are thriving and really did well and launched the industry here. And I saw the growth from when I was here from 1979 to 1985. I remember when John Paul was actually building Cameron. I went out there and he still was banging nails and hammering away. In the early days.
Tell me about your medical career. What were you studying and what were you practicing?
So, I went to OHSU for internal medicine. Internal medicine then led me into gastroenterology, and I don't know why, but I would say that more people are into food and wine and gastroenterology, maybe because we're dealing with guts and butts and that body function. But that was really great. And actually, as being part of OHSU, I turned the department onto wine. And we started buying wine collectively. In those days, you could actually buy wine in volume at a wholesaler. There weren't many that were doing that, but so I ended up buying wine for the department. They collectively, and we all explored wine. I think probably more than any other place, my wine knowledge grew from great wine buys, wine shop in Northeast Portland. In fact, I'll never forget the address, 1515 Northeast Portland. And Rachel Starr started that shop in the early 80s, and a bunch of wine geeks would show up there every Tuesday night for a tasting. And we tasted not just Oregon wines, but international wines. And I mean, I remember having my first bottle of Lafite Rothschild there, my first bottle of Chateau Beaucastel there, my first, we tasted the 88 Woodward Heritage Series there when it just was released. And I was so blown away by the quality of the wines coming out there. And we tasted Oregon wines too, but it was really learning about wine beyond Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and I really grew my wine knowledge there. And then in 1985, I decided to leave Oregon and take a job in New York as a gastroenterologist. And I was on Long Island, and I went to a tasting there, and the tasting was, everybody bring a bottle of wine and we'll taste it. Well, that didn't work out so well. I brought actually a great bottle of 81 Beaucastel, and someone else brought a Margaux, but then we had things like Bull's Blood and stuff that just wasn't worth tasting. And I said, okay, I'm going to need to start up a tasting group. So in 1985, we started up a tasting group. To this day, still continues long after leaving New York. And we did, it was fantastic. Everybody learned a lot. People that were part of my wife's medical career. She's an internist, she was an academic physician, and she was at Stony Brook, and a lot of the Stony Brook people came, people from basically all over Long Island. And those Third Thursday tastings continued until I left, and then have continued since I left with one of the groups.
As you were exploring the world of wine for this lens, what were the wines you found most attractive? What were the things you were most excited about?
Well, I can tell you how I first got excited about wine. It was my uncle that Thanksgiving in the 70s opened up 2 bottles of Bordeaux. He opened up a 1970 Figeac and a 1970 Gloria. The Figeac was something I'd never tried anything like that before, and I said, okay, now my dad's got to step up the game here, and no more just inexpensive Portuguese wines that we're drinking. And they were good, but these were just mind-blowing wines, and that really started my crusade into fine wine. I know I'm old enough that I bought 82 Bordeaux on futures. And in those days, it wasn't that much money. I mean, you could buy Chateau Mouton for, $45, $50. And as well Lafite for not much more. So I bought a lot of 82 Bordeaux. And, you then went into Burgundy, and you continue your learning and experiences. But I still drink wine from all over. Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone region. A lot of my more recent wine education has come through wine trips. And I'm going to give Ewald Mosler credit for that. Back in 2004, we did he said, Peter, you need to come to Germany to the wine auctions. So we go to Germany, and it was just an amazing trip. I mean, I'd done trips to Napa and Sonoma and to other local wine regions, but I was fortunate enough to meet his family, his mom, his sister. His town is Zeltingen-Rocktisch. That town had their wine festival that weekend. I got to meet people like Wilhelm Haag from Fritz Haag, and in fact, he had a gout attack while I was there. So I told him that he needed to get some indomethacin, and I became his U.S. doctor in a sense. And he remembered me. I've been back. He subsequently died a few years ago, but he always remembered me as his U.S. doctor. And I've been back. So I had such a great experience that year that I told my friends in Medford, I said, you guys need to go to Germany. And so the next trip, a year later, we went back to Germany, did the wine auctions, went to Alsace, and that started our annual wine trip. So the first trip that we did as a group was in 2005, and Ewald was there for that one. And in fact, then took people from from Great Wine Buy. So after we left Germany, they were over there. And since then, we've gone every other year to Europe and every other year a domestic trip. And with the idea, with more often being here in the wine country, but we've been to Sonoma. We keep talking about going up to Walla Walla, then we start here and we never leave. We never leave the Portland area. So the domestic trips are generally here, but we've been to Alba several times, Burgundy several times, Bordeaux once, Tuscany, Piedmont, Southern Rhone. We've done actually all of Rhone. So really, I mean, if you have the ability to do that, you really get an intensified knowledge of that region and those wines. So really great experiences. My day job allows me to do that.
You mentioned Medford in there, so tell me about getting from New York back to Oregon.
Well, we had kids, and once we had 2 kids, we thought, we really don't want to be on Long Island. Before we had kids, we lived an hour outside the city, and we would go into the city, and in fact, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was there was a tasting group in New York called Executive Wine Seminars, which was Howard Kaplan and Millman. And I used to go in there, but it was such a pain in the neck to go in there. I almost used a different word, different body part, but even that became difficult. I mean, in those days, I went to a vertical of Mouton dating back to 1928. I did a La Moline, La Landon, La Turque, Igal tasting. I did all these things that weren't insanely expensive in those days, but I stopped going because it was so difficult. And with kids, you just took away too much time from the kids. And once we weren't going into the city and playing in the city, we said, let's go back to Oregon. And Medford, we had friends in Medford, and they were looking for a gastroenterologist, and we thought we'd do that. And in those days, I have to say, I didn't think Medford and the Rogue Valley would become a wine destination region. We had a couple of wineries, and they weren't bad, but they were, more mom and pop. We're going to get nobody with a lot of classical training, and not really producing the wines that are being produced today. So we moved there not with the idea of becoming a winemaker, just the idea that I can live 5 minutes from my office in the hospital and just a nice, easy life in a good place for the kids to grow up. And that's how we ended up there.
What year did you move back?
I moved back in 1991. And we actually bought a house on 0.7 acres, and I turned the front yard into a vineyard. We planted 139 vines. And I thought I should have stopped then, but I didn't. And after the beginning of the Great Recession, we said, okay, this is a toy vineyard. We need a real vineyard. So we looked for a property that, again, was convenient, easy, and I thought would produce good wine. A nice kind of hillside property, which is where we are today. So we bought that property in what year was it? 2008. And it took us about 3 or 4 years to get the land prepped, because when we bought it, they had a bumper crop of poison oak and blackberries. So we've hired, just not where you want to go. So we got the biggest cat to come in there and rip it, and we pulled out all the roots, ripped everything, did a little spot spraying that we're not necessarily proud of, but had to do it. And now there's no poison oak. Blackberries continue because the birds plant the seeds. But we actually have a 9.6 acre vineyard on a 17-acre property. And people say, you're going to plant some more? And I said, no, I'm going to retire one day. And don't really need to invest more money into that. But I saw the potential for the Rogue Valley, long before we even bought the property. People were starting to make really great wine there. We have a small amount of Pinot being grown there. There are a couple of cool properties, but for the most part, our property is south-facing. We are pretty good hillside. I know it when I have to walk up the property. And it's planted to Syrah, Grenache, Malbec, and Tempranillo. And we just grafted over and now have Roussanne. But we also buy a lot of grapes. We buy Chardonnay from a cooler site. We couldn't grow Chardonnay. It just wouldn't work well. Mm-hmm. We grow Roussanne, which we're going to make our first varietal Roussanne this year. Last year, we didn't have quite enough Roussanne to do a monovarietal, so we made an MRV, Marsanne Roussanne Viognier. That turned out fantastic. Eric Weisinger, one of our winemakers, did that, incorporated our grapes. But this year we should have enough for a Roussanne, which is a great grape. Not everybody knows of it, but we won't have that much, and I think when people try it, they'll appreciate it.
Tell me about finding the property and deciding that was the place you wanted to invest.
Well, it just came about when one of my friends said, one of the hospital administrators who owned it was moving and had this property, and their house, my friend Mark, a cardiologist in the valley, has a beautiful view over the valley. And I said, I want a property with a view. We had a nice view in the old house, but it was limited. And I said, I want something with a view. And so we found this place. And even though it was, I know, a project and a lot of money to get it set for a vineyard, I knew the soil was good. I knew it didn't have boron. It has a nice slope. This way we wouldn't have to worry about rain at harvest. These days we don't have to worry about rain ever. But it was just a great place to be. And it's 6.5 minutes from my office with one stop sign. I mean, how much better does it get that you can actually live on 17 acres, have a 10-acre vineyard, and be 6.5 minutes to work with one stop sign, not even a traffic light. And I'm a city boy. I grew up in Brooklyn. I need restaurants. I need stuff. I drive through some of the wine country and the Applegate, and it's gorgeous, but that's a little bit too remote for me. I kind of need a city vineyard in a sense that has services and not have to drive much.
So clearly, by that point in your life, you had a pretty solid understanding of wine. What's different about putting in a vineyard and producing your own wine?
Well, I mean, the big difference is now you have to sell your wine. And I thought that the potential of Syrah in the valley was probably the most important grape that we have. So half my vineyard is Syrah, and then everybody, of course, told me the standing joke about Syrah. And for those that haven't heard it, I will tell you, what's the difference between a case of Syrah and a case of gonorrhea? Well, you can get rid of the case of gonorrhea. So that joke was told to me so many times when I was planting, and I said, I'll sell it, I'll sell it, I'll sell it. And interestingly enough, we just had a review from the judges of the Oregon Wine Experience, which is our big wine festival down in Southern Oregon in the Rogue Valley. And they were just gushing about Syrah. And so I think I made the right decision. Not always the easiest, and we've gotten double golds and really good medals for our Syrah. So that was good. Tempranillo. I like Tempranillo as a grape. I drink Spanish wines. And you have to give Earl Jones most credit for planting Tempranillo and producing world-class Tempranillos just north of here in the Roseburg area. And I thought the valley would do well with that. I changed clones a little bit because we're a little bit hotter site than where he is. And I did a Toro clone because Toro is really hot in Spain. And the Tempranillos have worked out really, really well. Grenache, I just planted that because I like it. I've yet to see world-class Grenache, but really good Grenache. And our Grenache is a little bit different than like Rhone wines. I think part of it is just young vines and don't dig down quite as deep and get the minerality that we'd like, but it has nice red, sweet cherry fruit. I think I did a pretty good job of choosing varietals. Malbec is just popular. The hard part of Malbec is competing against very inexpensive Argentinian Malbec. Ours, we can't compete, with that price. We can compete in quality, and we've done New World, Old World type Malbec tastings, and I think we do well there, but I can't compete on that price because they bought that property maybe a century ago, and they have less expensive labor costs, but still able to produce great Malbec at an affordable price.
What about sort of selecting a team and finding a winemaker and finding a way to kind of start the brand? Well,
that was a challenge. I chose a couple of winemakers. The first first two winemakers were Eric Weisinger, who Weisinger Family Winery, great guy, great winemaker, and I was really happy there. There was one winemaker that we had, which was Palate, Linda Donovan, excellent winemaker. We weren't it wasn't as easy to be a part of the team just because she was so busy. She's the busiest person making wine in Southern Oregon. So it was a challenge, and we've made some great wines with her. We actually moved towards more of a Rhone direction of wines in Barrel 42 or Quadi. And so now the predominant winemakers are Eric Weisinger and Barrel 42/Quadi. Quadi is the brand that they have, but Barrel 42 is the custom crush entity. We actually have a small amount made by Scott Steingraber from Crisell. We've had a small amount made by Kylie Evans from Two Hawk, that's now changed its name to Patagon. We've had, I suspect that the main winemakers will be Barrel 42 and Eric Weisinger. They do a great job. Eric's gotten very busy, but still making great wines. He's making wine in Texas now, as well as in Southern Oregon. And Crisell doesn't really do a lot of custom crush, but they're kind enough to work with our grapes and provide us some wine.
Tell me about, with the different winemakers you've had, about finding the style you like and sort of communicating that with your winemakers. So
we really are trying to make elegant wines. Some of the winemakers, and I know, for example, Palate, for example, likes ripe wines, and their wines tend to be a little bit higher in alcohol. She likes really ripe fruit. And that's not necessarily where we wanted to be. We can't help getting reasonably high alcohols just because it's hot down there. It's going to be in the 90s all week, and we're just happy when it doesn't get into triple digits. And so making elegant wines, it's not always possible, but that's the goal. In 2019, we had an unusual harvest of really cool weather towards the harvest time. We had November and September, and then we had September and November, and after didn't harvest until October because of the cool weather. And the wines are lower in alcohol and actually have a really pretty elegance to it. That won't be the norm because climate change, but that is our goal, is making balanced, elegant wines, and our winemakers really strive for that. Last year we picked the Syrah. It was a little bit the bricks just escaped, and got pretty high all of a sudden. So you just have to add a little bit of water to that and bring them down, and it actually worked. The Syrah that's going to come out from this last year, 2022, it's going to be fantastic. We have water this year. That's amazing. We haven't seen that in a couple of years. We are on talent irrigation, which gives us a water source, but last year they cut the water off in June, just when you need it, and we had no water. So last year's harvest was challenged by frost early on, drought, and we had very little fruit, which is, I guess, God's way of correcting my inventory. It just, last year we have Malbec at, or Tempranillo, 1.76 acres, dense planting, 4x6 spacing, and we had 1.1 tons of fruit. That is nothing. That is nothing. We made, for the first year, no Tempranillo, or Malbec, next to no Malbec. And even Grenache, that grows like a weed, was down in quantity just because of water conditions. Great fruit. I mean, we're going to have great wine, just not very much of it. So the correction is on. We unfortunately were part of the fiasco of copper cane a few years back. I don't know if you remember what happened there. They contracted with everybody in the Rogue Valley, and I had a contract, as almost everybody else did, and then they decided, because of, quote, smoke taint, they were not going to take the wines. Now, we grow Syrah, which has some inherent smokiness to the grape when there's zero smoke. And some of the same chemicals are in the grape itself. Fortunately, they didn't take the wine, the grapes. We made wine out of it, and we've gotten really great press and gold medals and double golds and things and scores in the 90s from the wine that grapes that they rejected. But it did create an inventory problem to start with. Instead of making 150 cases of this and 100 cases of that, I was in the 450 case category of each of these things. So we ended up producing about 1,500 cases of wine. For a small young winery, that's a lot of wine. Yeah.
Well, tell me about selling it. You said you could sell Syrah, so tell me about how you've sold Syrah.
You get people to try it. I mean, that's basically the best thing. The judges this year were out and tasted Syrah, and they had my Syrah at one of the dinners at a restaurant in Ashland. I'll give them credit, Alchemy. And we have a couple of Syrahs on the list, and I heard from not the judges themselves, but one of the dinner coordinators say, oh, they loved your Syrah. So it's just getting the word out. It's not easy. It takes a little bit of time, takes a lot of energy, tastings. And even here, I mean, we have 3 or 4 restaurants in the Willamette Valley, and people come here to taste Pinot and Chardonnay and maybe some Pinot Gris, but at the end of the day, and they've tasted, 10, 20, 30 Pinots, they might like a glass of Syrah at dinner. And so we're at a handful of restaurants in town. And going back to the kind of my original wine experiences and wine trips, Ewald Mosler is our distributor up north. So he takes care of the Willamette Valley and the Portland area. And it's just getting people to taste the wine. I mean, it's great wine. And no one goes up to the bar at an event and says, I'll have a glass of Syrah. It's either Cabernet or Chardonnay or maybe a Pinot. But if you can have it available by the glass, and that's really where it comes down to, getting glass pours. We've had a number of restaurants in the Willamette Valley and in Portland that have had our Syrah and glass pours. So that's really the exposure that we need. Been fortunate enough. Ewald's been great for us there.
So you talked a little earlier about when you got to Medford, you didn't necessarily foresee it becoming the wine place it's become. So tell me about the evolution of the Rogue Valley as you've been there, and where it is now, where it kind of is now in its wine life.
So the Rogue Valley is a pretty big valley with incredibly diverse climate. And you have Sam's Valley, which is very hot. You have microclimates that can grow Pinot and Chardonnay. In fact, one of our producers was at the Oregon Wine Experience at IPNC yesterday, dancing. They have a nice cool area outside of Jacksonville. Irvine and Roberts grows Pinot and does a great job, Pinot and Chardonnay, just to the east of Ashland. But most of the areas are pretty hot. And so it's taken time to find their grape varietals. We still have people that have planted varietals that are probably not best suited for where they are. And that's just taken time for evolution to weed out some of those wineries. Some of them are underfunded, and that's difficult. But I look at the Rogue Valley in a sense similar to what the Willamette Valley was when I moved to the Willamette Valley in '79. You had the pioneers, like Dick Erath and Ponzi and Bob Fuller and all these people that were working together to make the best wine. Our winemakers do work together. They have great respect for each other. And so the wines have really improved. I'll give you an example that the judges talked about. They tasted a Tarica Nacional that they really enjoyed. They tasted a Montepulciano that they really enjoyed, that they had no idea that they said as good as any of the Montepulcianos in Italy. How do you market that? In a sense, it's a one-off. And, Napa has its identity in Cabernet. Willamette Valley has its identity in Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. How do we get our identity? Because we have so many different varietals. We grow so many varietals, and I think time will sort itself out because you can't market everything. You have to be able to market a varietal, and I think Tempranillo has its place, Syrah has its place. The only ones that really have claim to Syrah would be Washington State. They do a great job. Ours are a little bit lighter and maybe not as big and as rich and certainly not as expensive as some of the Cayuse and other producers up there. So I think that was one of the reasons I chose varietals where I did, that we have potentially a source of identity. We do grow some really good Chardonnay and Pinot, but that's probably not going to be easily marketed as a region. I think Cabernet Franc, unfortunately, I can't grow that. I'm buying it this year. Cabernet Franc is really a good varietal for Southern Oregon because no one really owns a Cabernet Franc identity. Sonoma really is Pinot on the coast and within the more central areas, still some Pinot. But you look at regions like the Monterey area in the 70s was growing Cabernet because everybody wanted Cabernet. Well, they never made great Cabernet down there, and they figured that is not our varietal. We better plant something else. And I think in a sense, we're growing through some of that in Southern Oregon. It's not to say that we can't grow good, Cabernet. There is some good Cab out there, but it's never going to be our source of identity.
So obviously you mentioned that's been something that Southern Oregon's been dealing with a while, not having kind of the flagship varietal. Tell me about how you've seen sort of the tourism and the sales of wine change as you've been there. Do you find that people are identifying Southern Oregon more and more as a wine place?
We are getting more tourism. We now have a Rogue Valley organization that promotes tourism. I think that some people look at us as kind of like being in Napa in 1979. Most places either charge nothing for tastings or they charge minimal amount of money for tastings. What we have and what we need to market in Southern Oregon is not just winery and not just wine-related stuff. We have whitewater rafting. People come here for the Rogue to go down the whitewater. We have the Upper Klamath. We have theater, we have Shakespeare, we have a music festival called Brit. All these things that people can enjoy above and beyond the wine. So that's really where co-marketing has to occur. That it's the full package. And I would say up until 10 years ago, we had a relatively limited number of great restaurants. Well, that's been corrected. We have a lot of great restaurants. We have, I think, one of the best Italian restaurants in the, not just the state, but in the country. It's a great restaurant. We have wonderful continental restaurants. And I don't want to name names because I'll leave some of my other, friends and customers out. But there's so many great restaurants now. So you've got to get the whole package together. You can't just have wine. Wine, you have to have good wine, otherwise it doesn't work. But once you have good wine, you then say, what else can you offer? We were in McMinnville last night and having dinner, and there's so many good restaurants here, so many good restaurants in Portland. This is a foodie state. And now I can say Southern Oregon is participating in that foodie state. So we've come a long way.
I want to back up a little bit to talk about your sort of initial impressions of Oregon wine. So we've talked about kind of the Southern Oregon parts. So tell me about the North Valley as you got here in the 70s. Tell me about what you saw from the Oregon wine industry at that point.
Mom and pop operations. There were people just trying to make a living, growing grapes and making wine. But as been identified in multiple documentaries, they all work together. Everybody realized that most of them didn't have formal training, and not every wine was fantastic. And really the big change that's happened in the Willamette Valley is weather. If you go back to the 70s, I mean, one of the reasons I moved out of here in 1985 is I'd had it with the rain. I mean, I ended up with a good job in New York, and I was, happy to go home where my family was, but I'd had it with the rain. And that has changed. There's less rain. There's warmer climate. People have been able to, climate change has been very good in some ways to the Willamette Valley. I think that we don't want any more climate change because it may get too hot, and that's what's happening, of course, in Europe. And we're on wine trips where people are thinking of planting different varietals. I mean, even on the right bank of Bordeaux, we went to a couple of wineries that said, yeah, I think we're going to plant some Cab. We just have to be prepared for any further climate change. When you're able to grow grapes to make red wine in England, you've got to be able to, change your philosophy. But I think climate change has been overall a really good thing. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, there weren't a lot of great vintages in those days based on weather. A lot of rain. So I don't think, we still have occasional vintages that are cool climate, but even the cool climate vintages that we have, they still ripen enough to get really great wines that are structured, and that's true both in southern and as well as the northern part of the state.
So how have you seen the industry grow then? Obviously, you've seen most of its growth. You've been aware of it for most of the time it's been around. So what are the biggest changes now in Oregon wine versus when you were introduced to it?
So much better. I mean, and that has to do with so many factors. I mean, I'm sure, and I can't speak to this in the northern part of the state, but I'm sure clones have changed. People planting different clones, Dijon clone and this clone and that clone that necessarily weren't there. Wadensvale was big in the past. I think Wadensvale is a lot less popular now. So, I think adapting to the changes in environment and money. When you have big money, you can do a lot more, and you can, make better wine with big money. It doesn't mean you are going to make better wine, but you certainly have the ability to make cleaner wines, and you have a better facility. I think we've had lots of French winemakers come over and share their experiences now, and we're now making, I think, more. Some people are making more Burgundian style Chardonnays that wasn't being done years ago. So I think that it's just a natural evolution. I mean, I think that the combination of climate change, experience, older vines, and money. And I mean, that's where Rogue Valley still is limited. We have really no big corporate entities that have bought into the Rogue Valley. They are now buying land, and that's going to probably be true down in southern Oregon, because it has to happen. I mean, you know, they're looking for different varietals, and also less expensive land. I mean, there's not much left in Napa, so you've got to then figure where are you going to, you know, what are you going to do? By the way, I can tell you that there's a winery in Napa that sells their wine for a lot of money that has bought our Viognier several times. In fact, we just shipped out another case of the new vintage. And so it's really gratifying to see some of Southern Oregon's wines going down to Napa, not just Napa wines coming up to Oregon. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to do an exchange program, except my Viognier is $27 and their Cabernet is $135. So I don't think they were going to do a bottle per bottle exchange, but I'm just happy to have it down there. And actually, just exposure. I was just at my wife's reunion, and she went to University of Michigan. I got to see Ann Arbor for the first time. Wonderful campus, beautiful community. And I brought 6 bottles of Peter William wine, and I now have new customers and people to ship to around the country. One's up in Seattle, another one that's in the Bay Area, so places that I can ship to and are fans of Peter William. Getting our wines out there is just, that's the hard part. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, it's not easy to get. We're small, we're so small that we can't be in major distributors. We'd get lost in a book like that.
So tell me about with your brand, what are the sort of the milestones for you so far? What are the things, the kind of the highlights along the way of the Peter William brand?
Well, I think Viognier, just mentioned that. We've had 3 vintages reviewed by the wine enthusiast, and we've gotten the first vintage got a 94, second vintage a 93, third vintage a 95, the highest score ever given to a Southern Oregon wine. So we're really proud of that. We've gotten scores in the low to mid 90s on a number of wines. Hard to get your wines into a lot of the big journals. So the Wine Enthusiast has been very kind to us. We've not been in the Wine Spectator. You can't just get into the Wine Advocate easily. If it happens, it's great. But fortunately, local events like the Oregon Wine Experience. We got a double gold and best of class for a wine called Extravagance. And the wine's pretty extravagant, but I certainly like it. So, you know, it's been great, and I'm so happy and pleased that we've gotten good press. And I have to say, this is going to sound kind of weird, but I saw somebody I knew the other day and did a colonoscopy on them. And then they went out and bought 8 bottles of my wine, sent me a picture of their shopping cart filled with 8 bottles. So sometimes your day job even further supports your hobby. Now, you don't have to have a colonoscopy to buy my wine. I want you to know you can do it without a colonoscopy. But that happened just 2 weeks ago. So, and you know, being in a small town, I can tell you, I'm going to divert for a second, but one of the attendings I had at OHSU said, I can't imagine you in a small town. When I moved back to Medford back in 1991, and I said, actually, I love it. I mean, you know everybody. It's grown a lot, but at the same time, I've been there now for 30 some odd years, and I know a lot of the community, and that helps too in providing a base. Also, one of the unintentional marketing tools I had is I love to eat out. And so we'd go to a lot of restaurants long before Peter William Winery existed. And so I had the support of the restaurant community early on. So.
Well, so my next question was going to be kind of about along those lines in terms of sort of balancing the two, balancing a practice and a winery. Tell me about sort of doing both and how you make it work.
It's not easy. tomorrow is my last day as partner in the practice. Okay, so July 31st. I was actually going to retire January 1st of this year, and the practice has dwindled down with losing. We had a older practice group, and a lot of people have retired. So we went from 8 partners down to 5 as of January 1st, and as of tomorrow, we're losing 2 more, myself being 1. So we'll be down to 3, and so it's not just here in Oregon, or not just in Medford. My brother is just retired from a cardiology group. His group is half the size, and so there's an inadequate number of healthcare providers, whether it be physicians, mid-levels, whether nurse practitioners and PAs, healthcare providers and nurses. It's just a crisis in healthcare right now. People come up to me all the time and say, "Can you find me a primary care physician?" And I tell them, "No, I wish I could." I actually called a friend to be my primary care physician, and it turns out he's a nephrologist, and I don't have really kidney problems. He said, "You don't need me." I said, "No, I need someone who's a good doctor." I said, "And I really want you, and I'll throw some wine in there." I mean, here it is. I have full insurance and wine. So he took me on. But it's not easy. So as of Tuesday, I'll be working for the group, not as a partner, but as an employee in the group. And the reason in healthcare, what gets people to retire is being on call. You just can't do it forever. You can work pretty much forever, but being on call is not easy. And I just don't want to give up any more weekends of my life. I'm almost 70, and you don't know how many weekends you have. But I've been doing on-call since 1985, and a lot of weekends, and I think that's it. These days, I usually work until about 2 o'clock and then start delivering wines. And basically, it's one other guy, Fred Gold, who is the director of marketing, and myself, and all the others are basically people that volunteer and help, and we're really lean and mean. In fact, we're up here with another couple that helps me in wine tastings, and they are basically friends, and one is my medical assistant as well. So it's a family, basically it's a family event, and we're able to get by. So when people say, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm chief check writer and chief wine schlepper." I'm the wine schlepper. That's what I do. And so I'm out there until 5, 6 o'clock delivering wine. And my wife's been very patient. I think maybe it works out well because I am gone. Who knows, but she's been very good. And I still enjoy going to work. I enjoy going to work in the morning. I can't do nothing. I'm not good at that. I have to be busy. And so having 2 jobs, doesn't get better as long as I have the weekends to myself. So I'll travel more. That's what I'm looking forward to, is being able to just, travel more. And when you go to work and you don't have to work, it's a lot nicer than when you go to work and you have to go to work. So I have that going for me.
So congratulations on your sort of retirement, I guess.
Sort of, yeah.
Not retirement tomorrow. Yeah. How are you, as you look ahead for sort of balance between the two things, does that mean you have sort of expectations for Peter William that are going to change, or is most going to stay the same?
I think it's going to stay the same. I have more land that I can plant more grapes. And people say, definitely, you should plant more grapes. And in fact, one part of the property, because we own 17 acres, basically could be a really nice vineyard site. The guy who actually put in the vineyard, who's retired, now lives up in the Willamette Valley, he said, "This is the best plot you have." But it's not visible from my house. It's off to the side. So, I don't think I'm going to do that. I just don't want more cash outflow. I'm happy with where we are. We're pretty much able to sell what we produce, with the exception of that bump from copper cane. And other than that, everything else is pretty much in balance. And right now, what I've done to try to have direct to consumer is get some small lots. So this year we're going to be making a Semillon. I tasted Semillon from another producer, and I said, oh, this is really good. I like the grape. It's like I like Roussanne. And I'm not going to go out on a Roussanne crusade. I'm just going to have a small amount, and it will turn people on to Roussanne. I would say 90% of the people in the valley outside of the wine industry have never even heard of the grape, as well as Semillon. I'm now, this year, contracted to produce a small amount of Cabernet Franc. So the growth will be in small lots to sustain our wine club, rather than necessarily putting more wine out in the general public. Direct to consumer, obviously, is what everybody tries to do. We've had some bumps in the road with Jackson County and opening to the public. And right now, I think my wife would be challenged to have people coming to our house every weekend to taste wine. So we've sort of had some plans that needed some modifications based on the county, and I said, let's put this on hold. If I had more time, I might have a little storefront tasting room, but then it creates incredible complexity. And as another physician friend of mine who has a winery said, it was more fun as a hobby. So I'm trying to keep this as a hobby business. At least the IRS will think so. So I'm not really looking to turn this into anything bigger. Yeah, for me, the great joy is looking out every day over the vineyard, walking through it, and just being part of it. So that's the great joy.
With that said, you obviously mentioned kind of the small lots and some things that you're making that you don't grow. So are there other varietals, other projects you foresee that are things you haven't made yet that you'd like to mess around with?
Yes, a friend of mine who is Brian Jourdain from Ileana Wines, he just planted Chenin Blanc. I love the grape. And in fact, it's actually one of the grape varietals that was mentioned in the Oregon Wine Experience by the judges, that they tasted some really good Chenin Blancs. And there are a number of them out there now. So hopefully there'll be a ton or so of fruit, and I can make a really nice Chenin Blanc. Again, you can't market every varietal, and we have the ability to grow so many. But it's kind of like we were in Piedmont, and obviously the grapes that are marketed are Nebbiolo and Barbera and Gavi and Arnase, but they actually grow some great Riesling, and there are other varietals. Is someone going to necessarily go out and look for Piedmont Riesling? No. And I don't know that anybody's necessarily going to go out and look for Rogue Valley Semillon, but I tasted it. One of the producers, a winery called Fences, made a really nice one, and Eric said, I have the ability to buy some nice Semillon fruit. So I said, good, let's, get me a barrel's worth and I'll be happy. So that's where I see the growth in Peter William, is just small lots, direct to consumer on those lots. We have a winemaker, Scott Steingraber, I mentioned. He makes basically a barrel of fruit for us on some shared grapes, and it's a club only. It has never seen the public. It may this next year because we made a little bit more, but not much. It'll probably just be in some restaurants rather than in wine shops. We've purposely not tried to get into any national chains. So we are in local chains like Market of Choice. We're in Medford Co-op, Ashland Food Co-op, things of that nature, Harry and David, but not in national chains. And I think that's one of the things that helps us in marketing our wine, is that we're not in Costco. It's tough. You can't compete with Costco. And so once you're there, it's a little hard to stay in wine shops and other retail venues.
What else are you looking ahead to then? You mentioned more travel. Tell me about what you foresee the next year's looking like.
Well, I'd like to continue working part-time. We'll see if they need me. Right now, as I said, they've gone from 8 gastroenterologists to 3 partners. It's really hard to recruit, so I think they will need me to work part-time. We have 2 big trips this year. We are going down the Nile on that's not your typical cruise, but we're going to go down the Nile, and excited about that. That's in February. And then in July, we're going to be heading to South Africa. and Brian Jordan of Ileana Wines takes a trip every other year. He grew up there, so he knows not just the country, but the winemakers and people throughout the country. So that we're looking forward to that. A little more skiing. Robin and I still ski, and we bought our Icon passes this year, so we have to take advantage of that. I'm embarrassed to say that I've never been to Brookings, the coast where we are. I'm looking forward to just a little weekend trip there. I mean, we just unfortunately haven't had a lot of time, so when we have time, we just are head out. We have so many places to go. For me, I spend money on three things: food, wine, and travel. Nothing more. I don't need anything else. That fills up my life. So.
And having a winery, you're just throwing money into it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's wine education. It's great. I mean, taking trips to Europe really has provided, not just me. I mean, I know, for example, in one of the trips we went, Eric's been on a few of the trips, Eric Weisinger, and I think from that trip forward to Bordeaux, he's given up all American oak, with the exception of Tempranillo, which in Spain they use American oak. So we've kept that, but all the Malbec. We experimented with a barrel back in 2019 vintage. I told Eric, I want one new French oak barrel for me and for the Malbec, because we take all the Malbec fruit, he gets half, I get half. So I said, I want to see and we tasted the barrels, barrel sampling. And I said, oh my God, this is just much better. The French oak just gives you a much sexier wine. And so we basically, from that day forward, have given up American oak for all the wines with the exception of Tempranillo. So wine, those trips, and you get an idea of which barrels, you're looking at, and people, talking to them as to what works best for them. So my knowledge is expanded by every wine trip. I'm sure it will be in South Africa. So looking forward to that.
And what are you sort of seeing for you've talked about kind of how Oregon wine has grown, how the Medford area, specifically Rogue Valley, has grown. What do you see happening next in Oregon wine? Let's start locally. What do you see kind of happening in the Rogue Valley?
Hopefully getting national recognition. There have been a few articles. Decanter did an article about the Rogue Valley, and that was great. And we got listed in there as one of the wineries and one of the wines. I think that it's getting more national recognition, getting people to stop chasing trophies. If I had to say, I mean, I did it in the past. It's not that I didn't buy, Grand Cru Burgundies and first growth Bordeaux's. I did. They were a lot less expensive then when I did that. But I don't chase trophies anymore, and hopefully people recognize more that wine is a beverage that doesn't have to require a home equity line of credit to buy a bottle. That's really what it's come down to. And I think the Rogue Valley fits into that. Paso Robles is another place where they're making really good wine, and it's not insanely expensive. Not to say that you can't spend a lot of money, but I don't think there's a wine in the Rogue Valley that sells for more than $80. At least I don't think so. I think probably the most expensive is up there. So we haven't had and that's great. I mean, it sort of gets you back to that Napa 1979, 1980, 1982 when I was down there multiple times, and wines were affordable. So I'm hoping that's where the valley is, and there's expansion. I know there is starting to get some corporate interest, and that'll change things a little bit. And what happens is, as the original wine owners and winemakers get old, they frequently have to sell out and cash out, and you don't have kids that want to run the business, so you never know what's going to happen. But I think there'll be more money coming into the valley that will also change the complexion, but also maybe lift all the wines up. So I'm hoping that that's in some ways the case. And we'll just remain a small boutique winery, and as long as I can do it, and as long as it's still fun. wine people are fun. It's just nice to be part of wine people. Not to say that physicians aren't, but I can say wine people are more fun comparing the two jobs.
You have a lot of years of expertise here, so I tend to believe you.
Yeah, but of the people that are fun in medicine, gastroenterologists, they like to eat and drink, so that's okay.
What about for Oregon wine sort of in general? You've seen, like I said, you've seen much of the evolution of it. Where is it going next?
I think that the concern is climate change, and the concern is the certain areas like Dundee that are in the heart of the Willamette Valley and the warm sites may end up getting too warm if we don't see any change. The Van Duzer corridor, which has always been kind of that cooler Pinot corridor, that may become prime land, and some of the best, that those were questionable ripening. That is my concern for all regions. It's the climate change and what's going to happen over time. You can't predict the weather. You can't fully predict climate change, and I think that that's going to be a concern. There may be greater diversity, new clones, others that are less susceptible to the heat, but and I think that Rogue Valley in its sense is also trying to figure that out. I think people planted the wrong clones in the wrong place when they really didn't know. But I suspect 500 years ago they may have had some Pinot in Bordeaux and said, oh, this isn't good. And they may have had some Cabernet and Burgundy and go, this isn't working for us. And it's taking a long time. I think that there are varietals like Gamay that are really being done well in the Willamette Valley. Brickhouse, for example, makes delicious Gamay. I think that that's a varietal that we may see more of. I don't, I'm not really good at predicting the future, but you can't just continue doing what you're doing indefinitely without some change.
All right, last question for you. Obviously, you've accomplished quite a bit in your career so far. Tell me about what your biggest accomplishment is, or what you're proudest of as you sort of look back.
I would say being married for 37 years, having 2 boys, and having a family, a loving family. That's probably has to be number one. And I'm proud that my medical career really is, that's not, it's not something you can throw money at and do well. It's something that you have to just continue to work hard and continue to stay up. And I'm very proud of my medical professional career. And the wine, it's just icing on the cake.
Fantastic. That's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't?
No, I think you now know my whole life. The good, the bad, the ugly, It's all there.
And the IRS even came up on this, so don't worry, you're
okay, that we have to cut out.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Sharing your story with us.
It's been fun.
Excellent. We appreciate it. Go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.